Okay, so now that we've heard a little bit more about the Austin Cary Forest and how foresters use management tools to manage the land here, let's go a little bit more in depth about prescribed burning and also the plants here. So first off, Gage, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do here at the Austin Cary Forest?
Sure thing. My name is Gage LaPierre. I'm a PhD student here at SFRC. I'm also a long-term resident. I grew up right down the road from Gainesville in a place called Ocala, and my research is looking at the seasonal timing of fire. So when we do a prescribed burn, when fire happens on the landscape, how does that affect the plant community composition? Because when we know that when we burn places in the summer versus the winter, let's say, there are different things happen to those plants. So that's what my research is mainly about.
Very good. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more later in this segment. But first off, can you tell us a little bit about how fire can be beneficial to the ecosystem and the plants here?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Scott was saying, fire is incredibly important for not only the plant communities but the animals out here. And the big reason why it's so important is because a lot of these animals and plants have been around these fires for a really long time. We know that fire has been on the in Florida and the southeast for thousands, if not going onwards to millions of years. And the big thing, as Scott was saying, fires tend to favor grasses and flowers over some of the shrub species, and then you end up with a much open landscape that's not closed off. So I think that's the big reason.
Yeah. So now talking about fires can be dangerous, and we heard that we should definitely not try it on our own. But what are some ways that you guys go about making sure the fire is controlled, and what are the steps you take to ensure that it's safe?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is in prescribed fire, we plan a lot. In some cases, we will plan months ahead in advance, and even up to that night before we do a prescribed fire, we're always looking at the weather. And in doing so, that allows us to really be able to manipulate the fire and not have bad things happen. So in a wildfire, we can't do that. It's more of reactionary. We're trying to put out the fire, and in some cases we can't control the fire as easily as we could if we plan for it.
So in the case that a fire gets out of control, which I'm assuming is not very often,
No.
What are the steps you take?
Well, the biggest thing is we call upon our friends and other people who are in this fire world with us. So the biggest partner we have is the Florida Forest Service, and they are a great asset they also have more equipment that we can they come out to us and help us with the fire if it does get out of control. And there's also a lot of other people involved that we can also call upon if that were to ever happen.
Which is not very often.
It's not very often.
Okay, good. So you mentioned some of your research, and you're very plant focused. So will you tell us specifically what plant you're working with and why you chose that plant?
Yeah, so the main plant I'm working on, as you can see it behind us, it's a taller leafy plant that's called dog fennel. And dog fennel, what's special about it is it comes up after we disturb the soil. So it's kind of strange to why that happens whenever we have old fields or we have these cutover sites from timber. Dog fennel comes up within a few years, and while it's not necessarily a bad thing, in some cases, if we're trying to restore these areas back to pine savanna, where it's a really diverse system, what ends up happening is dog fennel doesn't burn well, so that really delays the whole process. And the big thing is, if it is a problem, how do we better tackle it? Maybe burning at one time of the year versus another will help minimize the effect of dog fennel. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how disturbance, whether it's through prescribed burning or mowing or all these different tools you can use to manage, it actually benefits plants. So why do you think a lot of people think that leaving land alone is the best?
Oh, well, I think it really used to be a mindset for a long time. I think it's was mentioned, I think, earlier here today about this difference between conservation and preservation, and you really can't wall off a site and then expect it to just naturally function, because we as human beings have such a big footprint on the landscape now. I mean, there's roads that would prevent natural fires from occurring, and in a lot of places we have suppressed fire. So the areas that would burn naturally would be very intense. And the other big thing is without management, we may not see fire as active, as frequent as we would like if we left it with our footprint on the landscape that we have now. So
very good. So I see you brought us some stuff to show us.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you have in your hands right now and what these different plants are?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I have in my hands, there are several different species right here. And these are plants that are really common to these areas that are burned quite frequently. What I have in my hand right now, this bigger guy, and I have several, so I'm just going to go through a few. This is rattlesnake master, and you find it in a little bit of wetter sites, what we call flatwoods, and that's different from sandhill because the sandhill is drier. So even though it's a wetter site, it still burns pretty frequent, and it would only be here if the habitat is open and sunny. This guy right here is what we call Aragonum, and it's also called dog tongue, so that's a funner name, then it's easier to say. And this is another one where we find it out in drier areas, sometimes in wetter sites, but it tends again to really favor the fire. And this is one of my favorites. This is Gymnopogon, and the funner name is skeleton grass, and this is a strange one that really, again, it only occurs in these areas where we burn it frequently, and not a lot is known about this one. That's why I like it. It's kind of a mysterious one. And I think the last one I'm going to show you is this guy. And this one's a fun one because it's called toothache grass. And toothache grass, the indigenous people of this continent, they used to use this as a medicinal plant to chew on and numb their mouths. And there are other perceived benefits of this grass health-wise. But I just think it's cool because it's found out here, and it really only occurs in these areas where it's open and sunny. So yeah,
that was going to be my next question for you. Actually, are these plants that you would find somewhere other than Florida or the southeastern United States?
Yeah, you would find them in other places in Florida, and you would actually find in the southeast, and you would find some things that look very similar to them, but they're actually different. They're different species. But generally, you're really only going to find these plants in areas that are burned. And that's the big takeaway here. These guys will not occur in areas that are thick and overgrown.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I think we have one more thing. We want you to show us how it works and tell us exactly what it is and what it's used for.
Oh, sure. So this guy is a drip torch, and this has been used for around, I think, almost a century now for prescribed fire. And basically, it's a mixture of gasoline and diesel, sometimes other things, and this allows us to really set fires. It's not it's called a drip torch because the fire drips out of the torch, and when we light it here, gasoline will the fuel mixture will drip out of the drip torch, and then it will light our fire. The other thing to note here is the barrel's curved, and that if it wasn't curved, then it would be kind of sort of risky starting fires because the flame might actually go back up into the canister. So that's why it's curved.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. So it's a piece of equipment that is used quite often, and it's one that has been around. And as you can see, it's kind of heavy, and that doesn't have fuel in it. So it can be. It's hard work doing this kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, I'll hand this off. Thank you. Okay, so one of my last questions for you, since we're kind of winding down on time. So why did you choose forestry as a profession, and why was the University of Florida your choice to come do your research?
Oh, well, I think the big reason why I chose, I don't like to say I chose forestry because I feel like in a lot of ways forestry chose me. My previous major was environmental science when I came here to University of Florida, and again, I grew up right down the road, so coming here was a awesome opportunity for me because the University of Florida, as we all know, it's getting up there in the rankings for one of the top colleges and the universities in the entire country. So it was a no-brainer to come here, easy to say, and really the big reason why I'm out here is because this is what has driven me in my life thus far. It's what I'm passionate about, and it's also I think it has a huge benefit for my friends, my family, and the community.
Very good. Very good. So I think now we're going to transition into some questions from people that are watching. If you're ready for that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Good.
All right. Hey, Gage. Thank you for sharing all of that information with us. So
Absolutely.
we do have a question that Julie asked actually a few minutes ago, but it turns out that it's an appropriate question for you to answer.
Okay.
It's kind of a two-part question. It says, I know that those ecosystems have native blueberries. So do those seem fire tolerant too?
Yes. So there's actually many different species of blueberries found out here, and that's an excellent question because not a lot of people know that. I brought my parents out here a few months ago, and when I actually told them, I was like, "Hey, this is a blueberry," and I said, "This is a blueberry," and they were like, "What? Wait, all of these are blueberries?" Indeed, they're all blueberries, and they're all different. Even though some of them look really similar, they're different. But yes, they're extremely fire tolerant. They come back after fires, and in some cases they can sit really low to the ground. And these are all adaptations to fire. We don't. I'm hesitant to say it's an adaptation to fire. I'm hesitant to say that blueberries like fire. These blueberries, but they do really well out here. So it seems like they do.
Okay, so a follow-up question to that one is, what are plant characteristics that are fire tolerant?
Oh, okay. Well, that's an awesome question. And this is one where if you go and you talk to fire scientists or ecologists in a bar, it may turn into a fist fight. It's just, it's very an interesting line of thought. But the big things really is, so there's some plants out here that can actually live for really long periods of time. So saw palmetto, this is one of these plants that can live upwards to thousands of years, just that individual plant. And one of the big ways that they're adapted to fire is that they can re-sprout very quickly after fire. Some species take advantage of that by being able to reproduce after fire very quickly and flower. And then there's even some species where there's a floral synchronicity between all these different plants, and they all will flower at similar times after fire. But even some more straightforward ones is like some plants just can hold so much energy underground. There's some plants that are out here that are so small and they don't look significant at all, but yet if you dug them up, you can find root systems that are super deep, and then there's other just giant tuber potato-like structures. It's crazy. Those are some fire adaptations, but there's a lot more.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. I like to see that excitement about it's talking about fire. So I imagine that you get some really interesting looks when you tell people that you study fire. So how many scientists are there like you out there that are studying fire?
Oh, I would not be able to answer that. I think there's just so many different scientists that are doing so many different things with fire. Take, for instance, the stuff that goes on out west in California. That kind of fire science is a little bit different than what goes on here at times, because a lot of times they're fighting fires, not prescribing the fires per se. And the other big thing is there's some people who are more on the ecology side of fire, and then there's other people that are doing things that are more related to just the conditions of the fires and mapping the patterns of where fires occur and how they occur and all that kind of stuff. So I have no idea how many fire scientists there are. I wish I knew.
Well, maybe you're unique, right? There's other people though. So let's talk. Julie has another question, and the question was in reference because when you were talking with her over there, you were talking about the dog fennels.
Yes.
So why dog fennel?
Why indeed dog fennel? I have asked this myself many times. So. Well, the big thing is dog fennel is kind of a mysterious plant. Like I was saying earlier, we don't really know why it comes up when we disturb the soil in some cases, and after sometimes it goes away sooner. Other times it sticks around for a few decades, and then it just disappears in the landscape, and we don't really know why. But the big thing about it, which I think is interesting, is it's toxic to mammals. It hurts their livers, and then it doesn't really pollinate a lot of things. So the big thing, combining all those thoughts together, it's led me to think that it may have been a plant that was really adjusted for big animals like mega herbivores that used to be around but are no longer around. And it's one of these things, it's kind of a lost adaptation, and now that we're around and we're disturbing the soil at even bigger scales than they may have been, that was that's why I think it's so interesting.
All right, so
Yeah.
that is great. So we are going to skip over real quick to a poll, and after we get the results of the poll, we're going to turn it over to Jacqueline. And so you talking about mammals was perfect to transition it over to Jen, who's going to talk to us about critters in the forest. But we're going to hop to a poll first. Ready?
Let's do it.
Hi, so as some of you noticed, we have been running a poll during each session, and so this time we asked the question, blank is a sticky southeastern U.S. plant species that establishes in areas with recently disturbed soil. And majority of you guys answered the question correctly. It is dog fennel.